Welcome to our new study that we'll be doing this spring in 2024 on holy women of old. This is going to be a little bit different because most of our studies so far have been on particular books of the Bible. This study is going to cover actually 6 books of the Bible, not in depth, but sort of as a hop, skip, and a jump. And what we're going to be doing is going into the Old Testament period, starting with the point when the children of Israel were still emerging from the wilderness and entering into the promised land. So we'll actually begin with the Battle of Jericho, and we'll end shortly after the death of David. So that's a period of about 500 years that we're going to sort of do a hop, skip, and a jump through. But rather than doing so we'll do it chronologically, but rather than doing it thoroughly and in depth, we're going to do so by looking at the lives of particular women who lived during this period and who are actually spotlighted by Scripture. Their individual stories are told both as standalone stories, but also as part of the broader narrative of what was happening for Israel as a nation during that time. And also, sort of, if we take a step further back, we get to see a little bit of redemption history playing out, of the background of the Messiah who would come to draw all people and all nations to himself. And that includes those of us who will be doing this study together this spring. So the period of time we're looking at begins around 1400 BC, at the point when Joshua was leading the children of Israel, had just led them across the Jordan River. And the first major city that they encountered was Jericho. And we're going to encounter a woman there named Rahab, who's actually not of the people of Israel, but was a native of the city of Jericho, and who actually behaved as a spy, not because she was a disloyal person, but because of her faith in Yahweh, the God of Israel. And so we'll look at her life, and then we'll enter into the period of the judges once the people settled in the land, and began to establish themselves as 12 tribes who are functioning as a quasi-nation, but without a central ruler. And we'll see that there were a number of judges during that period of time, one of them being Deborah. So we'll meet Deborah as a sample or representative judge from that period, who also led the nation in warfare when they were under threat. And then we'll move towards the end of the book of Judges, and read a very troubling story of a woman who's actually never named. She's just called a concubine. And we're going to see what happened during that period of Israel's history when there was no central government or leader, no king to lead them. And her whole story is framed within the idea of everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. And the story, and particularly the way the narrative is laid out for us, is going to show us how what was right in everyone's eyes was not at all right in God's eyes. And we'll get an opportunity to see just how wrong things were going as we study this woman's life. But we're also going to get a chance to see how she is in many ways a type of Christ. In fact, the only story of substitutionary atonement that takes place in the Old Testament. And then we'll move from Judges into the story of Ruth, and look at Naomi and Ruth and their lives of suffering, but also their lives of faith, and how through their faithfulness and their cooperation with each other, and devotion to each other, they end up producing the grandfather of King David. And so that's going to be a beautiful story. We'll then also move into 1 Samuel and meet Hannah, who is the mother of the kingmaker Samuel. And then by the end of 1 Samuel, we'll meet Abigail, who was the wife of a foolish man, a foolish but wealthy man. And we'll see how she functions in a very significant role in David's life, sort of being the counterpart to Nathan the prophet, and keeping David from a massacre that he was about to commit. And also saving her foolish husband and all the people who were under his rule. And then we'll move on into a very painful story in 2 Samuel of another woman, also in relationship to David. And this is the story of Bathsheba, who had been the daughter of one of David's mighty men and the wife of another of his mighty men. And we'll read the story of her being seduced, and I would say sexually abused by David, but then also of her becoming the mother of Solomon and being in many ways perhaps much of the source of Solomon's wisdom. And then another very sad story connected to David, Tamar, David's daughter. And this is the story of her resisting sexual abuse and eventually being overcome by it. And this is another very sad story, similar to the concubine, that doesn't end well for her. And then finally, we'll end up with Abishag, who's a very hidden figure in Old Testament history, but was a companion to David at the end of his life, was sought after by one of David's sons to be his wife and refused. And I think, this isn't an established fact, but I think that Abishag very well may have ended up being the voice of the beloved in the Song of Songs. And so she then ends up emerging as a source of some of our wisdom literature. So all in all, these are 10 women that we'll study over a period of 9 sessions, with a 10th session to sort of try to tie together the themes that we've seen, and perhaps look forward into the New Testament at Mary and Elizabeth, and see how they are in many ways a fulfillment of many of these women. As we look at these women, we're going to be looking in particular at their faith and their courage. We're going to meet a woman who was willing to be a traitor and even help out spies from another nation because she loved their God and was devoted to him. And she ends up becoming part of the line of Christ. In fact, there are 4 women named in Matthew's genealogy as being within the line of Christ, which is very unusual for a genealogy to include or name the mothers. But Matthew does this, and 3 of these 4 women are actually outsiders to the nation of Israel, but came into the nation and into the line of Christ because of their incredible courage and acts of faith. And so Rahab is one of these. We're going to meet women who were warriors, who were judges and governors of their people. We're going to meet women who were prophets and stood up to mighty, mighty people, to even warlords, and called them to righteousness and right living. And we're also going to meet women who were protectors and providers for their households in some pretty profound ways and through difficult times. We're going to also meet women who suffered greatly. We're going to meet women who were refugees and immigrants who fled for their lives from famine just to be able to survive, who lost their husbands along the way and had to figure out, in a very patriarchal society, how to get by, how to stay safe, how to find food, and how to actually find a way to perpetuate their lineage. We're going to meet women who lost husbands. In fact, 4 of the women we're going to highlight lost their husbands through one way or another, due to famine, due to some of them, their husbands were murdered. And so these widows learned how to live on the other side of losing both their protector and their livelihood, as well as the grief of one they had loved. We're going to meet women who are experienced and suffered abuse, sexual abuse, power plays that were intended to bring them under the dominance of men. We're going to meet 2 women who actually were pretty brutally raped, and one of them didn't even survive it. And we're going to enter into their stories. We're going to meet women who struggled with infertility and the shame that went with that, as well as the helplessness that went with that, and the social experience of being around other women who were having children and who were mocking them for being unable to have children. So there's this whole range of women whom we're going to meet, and I have a feeling that along the way, we're going to discover that they are not too different than we are. that a lot of the situations that we face today have been faced by holy women of old. And so my hope is that in doing this study, we're going to meet these women and perhaps become friends with them. We will find um, like like-minded people who went through similar circumstances, perhaps in different contexts, but not entirely different human experiences, and especially feminine experiences. And as we befriend these women and get to know their story and watch how they handled it, my hope is that we will find in them examples and mentors as we navigate the experiences of our own lives or encourage other women who are doing the same. And even more than that, I am hoping that through this study, we will experience them and their stories as meeting places in which we meet God. That as we watch and see the way God met them in the very messy, granular experiences of their lives and their stories as we're going to encounter them, we will meet God and see the way he meets us in the messy stories and granular experiences of our lives. That we will be encouraged in our faith, that we will be encouraged in our godliness and in our holiness, and that we will learn to walk with God through whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. So my hope is that this study will not be only about holy women of old, but it will be for holy women of today. And I look forward to doing it with you.